since I actually did a live broadcast. I have been extremely busy, but I still had time, of course, to do my YouTube shorts, and I hope that you've enjoyed them as well. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit seriously, but also as well a little with a humor. Of course, if you are not aware, Chuck Norris, of course, the well known tough guy, passed into eternity just a few days ago. And it was interesting. I was watching, and I've been watching several videos and tributes to, of course, Chuck Norris. He was, of course, that famous tough guy. His original claim to fame was that movie that he did in the early 1970s, where he was involved with a martial arts fight with, of course, Bruce Lee. And it was interesting. I was listening to a interview of Chuck Norris during the last few days where he actually talked with Bruce Lee about that famous fight. Now, it was, of course, well choreographed, but it also had an element of reality. They had to make it look as real as possible. So, of course, they did a very fine job of doing it. And Chuck Norris, at the time, was a world champion karate man. And he said, "So, do I win?" Bruce laughed and said, "No, you don't win. I actually win. But we've got to make it look as real as possible." And it was a masterpiece of choreographed martial arts. And Chuck, of course, lost the fight, but it was definitely one of the ways that he propelled himself and was propelled, of course, into the realm of acting and also getting involved with media. Now, during the 1980s and the 1990s and into the early 2000s, of course, Chuck Norris was involved as the tough guy. And for several years, in fact, he did a television program called Walker Texas Ranger. And he would get into fights with the local bad guys and he would win. And of course, that was the persona of what was going on. And so, of course, over the years, they did what we call the Chuck Norris memes, where Chuck Norris, is the tough guy. And of course, his different phrases, like, for example, the one that says, "When Chuck Norris does push ups, the earth moves, he doesn't." And then, of course, that famous line from one of the Expendable movies where all the bad guys are eliminated and Chuck Norris comes walking out of the big, plumes of smoke, and he's standing there. And the famous line where, of course, uh, you have Sylvester Stallone saying, "Hey, I thought I heard you die or almost die." He says, "Yeah." He says, "I was bit by a king cobra. And after 5 agonizing days, the cobra died." So, Chuck Norris was known for that. And of course, when he passed into eternity, you had all these AI different, videos that were put out there of Chuck Norris kicking open the gates of, heaven and now becoming the new sheriff in town. And one of the videos had Chuck Norris actually beating up the Grim Reaper. And it was basically now, of course, they have a new Grim Reaper and it's Chuck Norris. Well, of course, his life was larger than life. I remember back in the early 90s, we would be watching late night television, and him and Christy Blinkley would be on there doing, an infomercial for Total Gym. And of course, Chuck Norris would say, "I use Total Gym every single day." And, he was an incredibly larger than life individual. And in the recent days, of course, of social media, he had his own social media accounts where he showed, him doing exercise. And I was watching a video of a particular rabbi. His name is Menahem Bekin. And this rabbi brought to my attention something that I want to talk about today. He said on Chuck Norris's birthday, Chuck Norris, his birthday was March the 10th. And on March the 10th, when he was 86 years old, he did a video of him doing all these different exercises and, working out and showing that at the age of 86, he was, of course, in superb shape. And then 10 days later, he has a medical emergency in Hawaii and passes away peacefully with family and friends. And that particular movie or that particular video showed us, of course, the fragility of life. And it reminds us that every day we live, we're always just one moment away from eternity. Now, I'm not trying to be morbid or macabre, but it has brought to my attention, of course, the philosophy that every day that we live, we are one day closer to eternity. Not one less, one day closer. And so every day should be impactful. Every day should be maximized. I know that there are many people out there who just waste their time. And they waste their time on the wrong things. I want to remind you today that the accumulation of wealth, chasing after the almighty dollar, is, of course, futile. There are people today who will spend 40, 45 years working and then looking forward to retirement and discovering that retirement isn't what they thought it was going to be. In fact, they find it often is a lonely existence. And so they try to fill their lives with, something. And it's interesting how many people who are older that are actually lonely and discouraged and depressed. Why? Because they spent their life chasing after something that was actually a fantasy, a dream. And so many people these days do exactly that. They chase after a fantasy. They chase after a dream. Or they allow the opinion of other people to, basically dictate to them what they think they should be and what they are not. And that is a terrible trap to find yourself in. To discover one day that everything that you held dear all of a sudden is fleeting and actually futile. In the book of Ecclesiastes is the story of a man whose name was Solomon. Now, Solomon, of course, had everything that the world could give. He had fame, he had popularity, he had wealth, he had everything that the world could possibly give. And you know what he says? He says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. He says, I have done all these building projects. He says, I was involved with the lifestyle that people said was fulfilling. He said, I was able to do everything that my heart desire wanted to do. And he says, I found it meaningless and vain. And so basically, this ancient philosopher, this ancient teacher comes across to us today and reminds us that we should be involved in something more meaningful. You say, okay, what type of things should I be involved with that is more meaningful? Number one, other people's lives. Every day, you and I have an opportunity to touch other people's lives in a positive and powerful way. You know, just speaking a kind word to someone could actually change their whole disposition for that day. You know, it was Solomon who said, a kindly word is like, you know, as spoken at the right time, in the right manner, in the right way. You know what? It's like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 said this, love is patient and love is kind. So you and I, just by showing, you know, and speaking kindness into someone's life can change their entire disposition. In one of my broadcasts today, on another platform of social media, I talked about the story of William Wilberforce, John Newton, and John Wesley. John Wesley was a man who went over to Georgia, and he was there as a missionary. His missionary journey was an absolute disaster. He was a prim and proper Anglican clergyman who had come over to from Great Britain. His desire was, of course, to establish, you know, that type of mission in Georgia. Well, he found the people of Georgia, the colonists who lived in Georgia at that time. This was, of course, pre Revolutionary War. And he saw how the society in Georgia was basically an agricultural society, but it depended on slaves from, of course, Africa. And he saw the inequality, he saw the brutality, he saw the arrogance of the slave owners, and also how they treated the black people that have been brought over by slavers, of course, to Georgia. He spoke out against it and was basically asked to leave. He headed back to Great Britain and made a decision that he was going to speak against slavery. Now, one of the people that he influenced was a man named John Newton. Now, John Newton, his background was, of course, he was a slave captain. In his testimony, John Newton, and you say, okay, who's John Newton? If you've ever sang the song Amazing Grace, you know about John Newton, because John Newton was the one who wrote and also as well penned the music for Amazing Grace. John Newton was influenced by, of course, John Wesley. John Newton had been a slaver. He had been converted. He had been responsible of transporting over 10,000 human beings from Africa to, of course, the New World and to the colonies. And so when he was converted, he made it his life mission to, of course, abolish slavery. And one of the young men that he had influence over was a young man, a young parliamentarian, whose name was William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce had was strongly influenced by, of course, John Newton and John Wesley's ideas against slavery. So what did William Wilberforce do? He said, we're going to abolish slavery through an act of parliament. He brought his anti-slavering piece of legislation 300 times to the British Parliament. Almost 300 times his bill was defeated. But through public pressure and also as well a change in climate politically, the bill was passed. And decades before the nation of United States, who fought a civil war over the slavery, was outlawed in the British Empire. Now, at the time, the British Empire, of course, was the largest empire in the world. And even today, there is over 50 countries in the world that are part of the British Commonwealth. They basically have their roots in, of course, the British parliamentary system. My nation of Canada, for example, is part of the British Commonwealth. Now, get this. The Royal Navy then, of course, had the mandate to go and, they used to say Britannia rules the waves. And so the British Navy would stop the slaver ships. They would arrest the slavers and would set the slaves free. They literally saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Why? Because an act of kindness and love because of one person. One person can make all the difference in the world. But we have to make a difference in our world. You see, Chuck Norris often would say this: if I can influence one person for justice, for love, and for care, he says, I've done my job. One of the organizations that he himself founded was an organization that rescued children from, the streets of United States, the mean streets of United States cities. And his organization would basically train them in the martial arts and also in positive reinforcement. Just recently, before he passed into eternity, Chuck Norris had a conversation with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he said, Arnold, if something ever happens to me, I want you to, of course, oversee my organization that works with kids. And so Arnold Schwarzenegger, a couple of days after Chuck Norris passed into eternity, said, I have been appointed as the new chairman of Chuck Norris's organization. Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, is involved in many different charitable organizations, but this was an organization that Chuck personally asked Arnold to be involved in. And Arnold is now going to, oversee an organization that has helped thousands of young people get out of that, poverty mentality, because poverty mentality is not a mentality of, just being poor in the physical sense. Poverty mentality is a victim mentality where people look at themselves as victims. And I want to tell you something. You'll never become a victor if you have a victim mentality. You will never become a conqueror if you have a conquered mentality. You'll never become an overcomer if you have, a mentality that says, I can't overcome this. You'll never be an undefeated individual if you walk around with a defeated attitude. It is total perspective. It's very important. I love the story of Michael Jordan. And the reason I love the story of Michael Jordan is because of the fact that he grew up, of course, as the son of a single mother. And he was told over and over that he would not be, his actual love was basketball. And he was told many, many times he was not going to be a basketball star. But you know what? His mother believed in him and said, Michael, you follow your dream. It is your ticket out of this poverty idea. She, even though she couldn't supply, the so-called benefits of life, she instilled in him a never quit mentality. He actually said, I have missed more shots than I've ever made. In fact, he says, I have taken 10 shots to just get the one good shot. So what he was saying to, of course, the people of his generation and our generation is, you are not defined by where you live. You are not defined by the company that you keep. You make the decision about what kind of person you are going to be. And every day that we live, we decide that. When you get up this morning, you make a decision. And that decision is, I am going to be an inspiration. I am going to be a motivator. I am going to be a role model and a mentor. I am going to show love and kindness and mercy and grace to those in my world. I am choosing to forgive. I am choosing to expand myself. I am choosing to be a blessing. That's your choice. That is how you need to understand that every day is a gift. They've often said this, and a Jewish rabbi put it this way. He says, yesterday is in the past. Tomorrow is a lie. He says, the only day that you have is this day. You know, it was David who said this. This is the day that the Lord hath made, I will rejoice and be glad in it. David also wrote in Psalm 37:23, the steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord. Simply put, you and I have an opportunity today to make an impact in our world. Chuck Norris, of course, made that type of impact. Many people know about Chuck Norris's faith. He was a man who, through his journey of life, became a Christian. And that basically framed his later life. Up to, right up until he gave his life to Christ in the 90s, Chuck Norris was known as a bit of a rebel rouser. But after he came to know Christ, he was an individual who did everything he could to be a positive influence to those around him. And Chuck had a simple philosophy, and that was that every day he was going to be a blessing, that he was going to touch his world in a positive way, and he did. Yes, he was known as a tough guy, and he actually embraced all the different things that people said about Chuck Norris's and his toughness. Well, the simple fact is he has passed into eternity. But we have an opportunity to, of course, enhance his legacy and touch people in a powerful and tough way. You really do need to be tough these days. Just the other day, yesterday, in fact, I saw how the war in Iran is affecting my pocketbook. I went past the local gasoline station and saw in my community that the price of a liter of gas was now up to $1.66 a liter. Just a month ago, that same gas station was advertising gasoline at $1.16. The price of gasoline in my community alone has gone up 50 cents a liter. Now, to get that in perspective, it takes 4.5 liters to make a Canadian Imperial gallon. That means that the price of gas in just the last month has gone up over $2.50 a gallon. That's right, $2.50 a gallon. And it's all because of the decision of one man. The man's name, of course, is Donald Trump. And he decided that he, along with the Benjamin Netanyahu, were going to attack Iran. And they fully expected that the Iranians were going to just roll over and say, I quit. Well, obviously, he doesn't know very much about religious intolerance. The nation of Iran is, of course, run by, religious zealots, okay? And religious zealots don't just roll over and say, hey, I quit. And so now United States is trying to figure out how to extract themselves of a war that they started out of arrogance and also out of a certain thoughts. And the simple fact is, Iran wasn't Venezuela. And The same thing happened, of course, with the Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian war has been going on for 4 years. Vladimir Putin figured that the Ukrainians would just roll over and say, we give up. Well, that's not what's actually happened. And right now, the Ukrainians, they are experts in drone technology and drone warfare. And just last month, I was reading that over 10,000 Russian soldiers were killed by drones. The Ukrainian drone leaders have decided not to attack Russian implements or armament, but to actually attack the soldiers themselves. And the Russian army cannot replenish the people that they're losing. And that is very, very sad. This is the world in which we live right now. And we're all being affected by the warmongering of other individuals. And in my conversation this morning, I was talking about the prophet Isaiah. And the prophet Isaiah was a man who lived in ancient Judah. And the story that I was talking about today was how that the Moabites, which was a nation next to Judah, had been involved in a war, and how that Moabite refugees were now finding themselves in, of course, Judah. And here he was reminding the people of Judah that they had to show kindness and love to, of course, the Moabite situation, the Moabite refugees. When I was living in the city of Edmonton, the Ukrainian war has, of course, caused over 7 million people to leave Ukraine. When I was living in the city of Edmonton, my next door neighbor was a Ukrainian family that had come over from Kiev and had reestablished themselves in Canada and were becoming part of the Canadian fabric. When I was driving school bus in the city of Edmonton, most of the people that were on my school bus were actually Ukrainian children who had come over from Ukraine and were now living in the city of St. Albert, where I was driving bus at the time. These were young people, young children who had seen the horrors of war and now were living in a free society. And it was interesting that they actually were making an impact in the school system in which they were, of course, involved. There were certain policies that were being promoted in the school system in the city of St. Albert. And some Ukrainian mothers said, these things are wrong, and we do not want our children to be educated this way. And you know what? The school system backed down. And of course, those controversial policies were set aside. These Ukrainian mothers said, we didn't come from our country to see this type of stuff put upon our children. They stood up. And we, in turn, have an opportunity every day to touch people's lives in a positive way. In my discussion about Isaiah, I was reminding my audience at the time about the fact that you and I have an opportunity to speak up for those who have no voice, to touch those who are vulnerable. Let me tell you this. There are people that you know that need your help. People that are feeling defeated right now, feeling like a victim, feeling like things are overcoming and overwhelming them. People who feel today that they're being conquered by the world around them. You and I can give them a word of encouragement. We can show them an act of kindness. We can be a role model, a mentor, an inspiration. My son, when they were doing, of course, in the next couple of months, FIFA, the World Organization for Soccer, we're going to be holding soccer matches in United States, in Canada, and in Mexico. It's going to be interesting to see how this all turns out with what's going on in our world. But there was a song back in 1998 when the World FIFA was on, and it went, I get knocked down and I get up again. And my son, who was younger at that time, would walk around singing that song. I get knocked down, I get back up again. And he would sing it over and over again during, of course, the World Cup that was happening at the time. And my son is a real soccer fan. He loves soccer. He played soccer when he was younger. And I have a granddaughter who actually plays soccer right now. The interesting thing is, my granddaughter, her team that she plays for in the city of Edmonton actually got a gold medal. And my granddaughter is actually right now being scouted to become a Canadian champion in soccer. She's 15 years old and she's extraordinary in soccer. She is a real warrior, and her desire is, of course, become a professional soccer player. She plans, and she is, of course, she is actually being scouted right now by the Vancouver Whitecaps, which is the premier soccer team in Canada. It has two groups. It has the men's side and the women's side. And she is actually in the program on the Whitecaps. And so my granddaughter, her aspirations is to play in Europe and do a national and become an international star in soccer. And it looks like she's well on her way. But the point is, when you get knocked down, you got to get up again. There's a Japanese proverb that goes like this: you get knocked down 7 times and you get up 8. And I'm thinking to myself today, okay, we have only one day in front of us. This is the only day that we have. Tomorrow, of course, there's no guarantee. Yesterday is in the past. Paul says, forgetting those things which are behind and looking forward to those things that are ahead. You know, hindsight is 2020. You often said, why didn't I say this? Or why didn't I do that? And I want to remind you that every day you and I have an opportunity to be offended. We have an opportunity to be, wronged. And how we react is going to affect not only today, but what we do tomorrow as well, if we have a tomorrow. Here's a reality, and I'm not trying to be morbid or macabre, okay? According to statistics, 1.3 people are going to pass into eternity every second. There's 184,000 seconds in this day. That means that at least 184,000 people are going to pass into eternity today, okay? Maybe even over 200,000. Every one of those people got up and thought to themselves, I am going to live today. And they don't make it. And we have multiple stories of how that happened. Chuck Norris got up on the morning of March the 10th, his birthday. And he said, hey, I'm in better shape than I have been in years. And he did his video. And 10 days later, he had a medical emergency in Hawaii and he passed into eternity. 10 days before, he was, on video showing his strength and showing how good he felt. 10 days later, he was gone. Again, a simple reminder that every day that we live, let us maximize it and use it in a positive manner. Maybe today, give someone a phone call and remind them how much you appreciate and love them. Maybe give them a text. Maybe today, actually go and visit them. Reach out to somebody today, because you don't know what tomorrow is. As that Jewish rabbi said, yesterday, of course, is in the past. Tomorrow is a lie. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So the only day that you have is this day. So maximize this day. Use it in a positive manner. And if you are offended, forgive. Release it. Let it go. It's not worth even one moment of consideration. I know that there is an opportunity and a possibility of being offended or hurt today. If you're involved with people, there's a great possibility it's going to happen. But what you do makes all the difference. If you choose to forgive, if you choose to love, if you choose to let it go, you say, well, you don't know what they did to me. You're right, I don't. I want to share one story in conclusion today. It had a really powerful effect on my philosophy of life. Years ago, I was living in the city of Yellowknife, and a young man came to me. I was, of course, a clergyman, and he came to me and said, I have a real unforgiveness towards my dad. And he began to explain to me how and what he had gone through, not realizing that I myself had gone through a similar situation. And I said, well, you got to forgive your dad. And then I shared my story. He says, your story is so similar to me. He says, how can you forgive the people? I said, you forgive the people not for their benefit, but for your benefit. And I had him actually sit down and write a letter to his dad. Now, his dad was dead, but here he was carrying this anger, this bitterness, this unforgiveness, and it was colorizing everything he did and everything he was involved in. He was involved with this young lady, this beautiful young lady, and it was difficult for him to reach out to her in love. He says, I really love her, but I don't know how to do it. So I had him write a letter to his dad saying, Dad, I forgive you. He says, well, my dad won't read it. I said, I understand that. I said, but you will be able to express how you really feel. And then at the end of it, just say to him, Dad, I forgive you. Well, as he was reading this, as he was writing it, I saw his body position change. All of a sudden, he began to soften. All of a sudden, he began to change right in front of me. His facial expressions changed. And then he penned the words, Dad, I forgive you. And the dam broke. He began to weep. He began to sob uncontrollably. And I put my hand on his shoulders. And he said, I feel so different. He says, the pain is gone. He says, the anger is gone. The tension that I felt in my body for years is gone. I said, that's right. I said, the reason it's gone is because you've forgiven them. I said, you are released. I want to tell you something. He was a different young man. The young lady came to me. She says, I don't know what you did. He's a changed individual. He's loving. He's kind. He used to be so cold and reserved, but now he shows me that he really cares and loves me. He's a changed individual. What happened? I said, why don't you ask him? So she did. And he told her about the unforgiveness and the pain that he was carrying and how it colorized everything that he saw and how he lived and how it affected his relationships. Forgiveness, I cannot tell you how important it is. Yes, I know that we get wronged. I know that we get offended, but we forgive not for the benefit of the individual. We do it for ourselves to have peace, to have love, because Jesus said in Matthew chapter 22, 37 to 40, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He was basically saying when you let love become a part of your identity, it's going to heal you. And when love has its full effect and you are healed, you in turn are going to reach out with the same manner of love that you have received. Jesus said, it is better to give than to receive. Paul put it so succinctly in Matthew, or I should say, 1 Corinthians 11:23. He says, that which I receive, I am passing unto you. So today you have an opportunity. I have an opportunity. Chuck Norris is gone. And his legacy, though, as a tough guy, but also as a philanthropist and as a positive influence, is going to continue. It's going to continue with you and I making a difference in our world. I'm not saying that you're going to set up some society that is going to reach and touch thousands of people, but one life can make all the difference. I close with this story today. It's a story of a man who lives in a major city in China. Now, in that city, of course, the mighty Yangtze River runs through that city. And in that particular city, there are large cliffs of the Yangtze River. And to basically span that river, they built a bridge. And the bridge, of course, is only about 15 feet above the river. But the gorge that is in that Yangtze River is almost 1,000 feet deep. And what was happening was in Chinese society, many people are overwhelmed. Did you know that in China, for example, people are expected to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week? They get up and go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then they work till 9 o'clock at night. Now, in that particular society, there's a lot of stress, especially with young people. And so many people see no way out except suicide. And until they actually put suicide guards over that particular bridge, every single year, hundreds of people would just simply jump off the bridge and go down into the gorge, into the Yangtze River, which the Yangtze River is a major river. It's almost 3,700 miles long. It's one of the top 5 rivers in the world. And of course, it has, spectacular scenery around it. And so this one particular man made it his mission to go and speak to the jumpers. And he actually, in the last 3 years, has talked over 500 people out of jumping. He simply goes there and is a calm, reassuring voice to them and tells them, listen, it's not as bad as you think. He has been personally involved in saving over 500 lives. And his story has become an international story of kindness and love. And you know what? One person can make all the difference in all the world. I told the story of William Wilberforce, John Newton, and John Wesley. Today, you may not be a John Wesley. You may not be a, William Wilberforce. But remember, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. You and I can make a difference. Let's do that today. Let Chuck Norris's legacy be our legacy. One of kindness, one of courage, one of toughness, and one of compassion. Father, thank you today for the time that we spent together. It's been a wonderful opportunity to share some few thoughts about how that we can make a difference in our world. I pray we will. I pray today that we will be an inspiration, a role model, a mentor, that we will show people what compassion and love and kindness is all about. Just one act of kindness can brighten someone's day. And here's my final thought. People may not always remember what you said, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. Make them feel good. Make them feel inspired. Make them feel like someone cares. My name is Robert Dean Steele. Thank you for joining me today. And of course, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, I encourage you to press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I want to thank all the people who have recently signed up to be a part of my video audience. Thank you so much for doing that. You are such a blessing to me. Also, as well, please check out my YouTube shorts every single day. I do a series of small little monologues, nothing like this, where I just share with you a simple thought. They're usually under 1 minute, and it doesn't take very long to hear what I have to say, but just maybe what I have to say can be a word fitly spoken, like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. Check those out as well. Many of you do that, and I want to thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Robert Dean Steele. You have yourself a great and godly day.